Welcome. You're about to join me, Devin Wolfe, for some Wolfe Wisdom. I'm all about children and teen emotional health and emotional development. So developmental trauma is my topic in this part of the filter bubbles of trauma. I'm jumping into the middle of the mess, the middle of the infographic. And this is a kind of back to the future format, so you might feel some left to right confusion on the infographic. This mimics the convoluted relationship between the past, present, and future with trauma being frozen in time and space. I'm starting with the activism of the adverse childhood experiences movement, and then look back at how generational norms can shift to crack that ice of trauma. Professional development for teachers right now on trauma continues to focus on the ACE study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, ACE. The multiple impacts of ACEs in childhood on mental and physical health in adulthood is now 20-year-old information. The original research was a fantastic interdisciplinary collaboration, identifying the link between sexual trauma and eating disorders, and identifying the link between attachment trauma and addictions. So let's no longer be ignorant to those well-documented links. But since we are already adults, you might be asking, is this information too little, too late? It's not too little, because it's always healing for adults to recognize the intelligent ways they adapted to adversity in early life. Plus, understanding better why addictions are persisting. And it's not too late, because now is always the best time to protect kids from ACEs and strengthen the relationships around kids for trauma healing. Adverse childhood experiences include abuse, neglect, threats, being victimized, witnessing violence, also mental illness, addictions, and incarceration happening within the family. More up-to-date studies have added to that original list of ACEs to include racism, gender bullying, right? Homelessness, failed foster care placements or adoption, deportation, immigration, refugee status, forced separation from family, and last but certainly not least, attending a school that enforces a zero-tolerance discipline policy. Now that last point is some serious food for thought for schools. Discipline in schools has come from a dark history of caning and strapping in British schools, plus shocking, abusive parenting and teaching practices in Central Europe, and horrific conditions in Catholic residential schools and Canadian provincial detention facilities for so-called delinquents. And that's to pin, some blame on the recent history. So behavior approaches have little credibility. In fact, quasi-legal labels like delinquents, used just one generation ago, along with official diagnostic definitions of anxiety and depression, sensory dysregulation, sleeping and eating disruption, and conduct disorders. These all describe outcomes of developmental trauma. We've been holding on to a very old thought pattern that consistency of behavior consequences holds the secret sauce to better behavior. And this is not true, because the consistency we all say children and teens need doesn't come from consequences. The consistency they need comes from relationships. The fact that zero tolerance policies create ACEs emphasizes this point. Zero tolerance is itself intolerable. And this is surely an example of the ignorance and blind spots to childhood trauma that we've had. Schools are living systems capable of sensitivity to child and teen trauma and capable of active trauma healing, so there's no excuses. If 4 or more different kinds of ACEs are experienced before the age of 19, then researchers expect the outcome to be post-traumatic stress. Yes, PTSD, like experienced in war zones. PTSD sets the potential for continued adverse experiences reoccurring and impairment in social, emotional, and cognitive growth. And this is because the central nervous system of a child or teen is too underdeveloped to organize the stress response network of the body and brain. So young neurobiology gets disorganized, growing chaotic neural networks, connecting digestion, heart, mind, and body, and by priming kids for anxiety and aggression. In fact, areas of the brain responsible for emotions can be 20 to 30% smaller than normal among severely abused and neglected kids. In these kids, the brain will have lower levels of serotonin, and that's the calming neural hormone, low levels of dopamine, the happiness hormone, and higher levels of cortisol, the stress hormone, resulting in impaired capacity for relationships, stress tolerance, behavior control, attention, learning, goal setting, and self-esteem. That's quite a list. So take a deep breath, because here's the hopeful flip side. Healthy relationships regulate a child's emotions and feelings, and then the body's neurobiological networks can proceed in an organized way and even rewire. Yes, good relationships enhance kids' capacity for more good relationships, and their capacity to face stress, and their capacity to regulate big emotions. Developmental trauma is certainly a problem schools are buffering by working in more relational ways. So the best basic plan is always to stay outside that bubble, that filter bubble of ignorance, to be sensitive to how trauma is expressed by children and teens. Yeah, misbehavior gets our attention. Yes, it does. But unless we remain curious about the patterns of violence and suffering in our world, we will miss the signs and symptoms of trauma in our kids. Some of the most shocking examples of violence, shocking because these happen in well-resourced and relatively peaceful societies, like mass shootings and kids beating kids, or teen suicide and drug death. These have already instructed us to pay attention to the three fiercest emotions: separation, frustration, and alarm. These are the big three because of their potential for disruptive behavior and destructive behavior. And you can check my website blogs to read more about those big three emotions. A good way to understand how toxic environments are overlooked is by visualizing a school of fish. Even the adult fish can be ignorant to the pollution around them if they themselves hatched into toxic water. Hatching and growing in polluted waters sets us up for ego-mindedness, seeing only one point of view, and we believe that violence or suffering is normal. So we all proceed to adapt to toxins by getting numb, or we believe that life includes violence and even justifies high levels of aggression from ourselves and explains why we're so highly anxious. So be curious to see the relationship between a toxic environment and toxic behavior. And it might feel like a leap of logic that trauma-sensitive schools can change society, but that is the truth. That is the truth. Just like everything listed here on that list of activism, there is a potential global impact. I mean, Amazon Watch, to ignite the enormous environmental movement that we see. Animal rights, anti-apartheid, Black Lives Matter, they're all related. Drug harm reduction, farm workers' rights, idle no more, landless peoples, the Me Too movement, men's rights, or rape culture. I mean, they're all related if we can look at the suffering and the violence. All social activism grows from being curious to becoming echo-minded by witnessing suffering and listening to the stories of those who suffer, to notice just how polluted the ecosystem has become. But it can take generations to notice. It can take generations. What I mean is that living conditions that we humans consider to be normal and unchangeable will shift over these generations. So that's the blacklist of the symptoms of trauma. It used to be normal to believe delinquency was the root of the problem. But generational norms have shifted for us to understand that symptoms like alcoholism in the family or racial and gender shaming at school are the roots of severe chronic behavior of kids. For example, it has taken generations for human rights to be extended to the rights of a child. It has taken generations to call out mental health stigma in order to realize how we have been blaming the victim. Children in well-resourced communities are better protected now, yet ACEs persist. So I'm going to push this infographic to its limits in part 3 next week by talking about the structures of trauma and why ACEs persist. Until then, try this. Fill out the Adverse Childhood Experiences Screener. This is public information you can find yourself, but I've posted it on my website. I want you to find your score between 0 and 10, because many of us will be surprised to know we have scores higher than 3 or 4, where outcomes of PTSD are common. And this can explain our volatile temper or our struggles with anxiety. Or maybe you are functioning very well, even though you have a high score. And why is that? I know it's because you've had great relationships over much of your life to avoid severe negative outcomes. And I'll talk more about that next week. If you want to find any of my infographic deep dives, please search YouTube for Devin Wolfe, WolfeWisdom. And remember to spell Wolf with an E on the end. My website is wolfewisdom.ca, and everything I post informs adults about emotional development of their kids. We cannot grow up for our kids, but they cannot grow up without us. Emotional development, I love this topic.